The other day we were getting together with my family. We were going to go off to eat some food, and so there was many of us, and so we were like, okay, let's carpool together. And I offered. My mom always is the one driving, my brother and others around, and so I was just like, I'll drive. It's okay. So I go and I open up the van door, and like I hit the seat and the steering wheel with my foot, and I like flew back. I didn't even realize what had happened in a moment. But what had happened was my mom is a little shorter than I am. And her seat's a little bit tucked forward more than mine is. And I just was like on autopilot and hit my foot on the edge, and I bounced back out. I was just like, oh, okay, wait. So I like scooted in. I was just like all tucked up, and it was like I hit the button and slowly then like put it back into where I was at. And like, I don't know if you've been in some of these newer cars with their custom settings, and like it's like a video game profile, like on the front, like you can hit like, person one, and like everything all like gets all synced up to that person, the music, the seats, like they have. Like my mother-in-law, she has this car, like heated seats was the thing that I'm like, oh man, that's really cool. Like I wish that someday maybe when I grow up I can have a car that has that. And then they introduced cooled seats, like so you can have the heat and the cool, and you can like adjust it just right. But then she's got vibrators. Like it's a massage chair in her car. I'm just like, what is this? Like, oh my goodness. And it has the like custom settings. She can set it exactly the way she wants. And she has like the way that she wants it in there. Like you setting the heat and the cool just right, and the music just right for her. And my mom like having to like, after I was done putting it back in there. But we all have these custom settings when it comes to cars. And I don't know if you've ever had somebody who's like, you're about to drive somewhere and they're like, hey, do you want to carpool? Hey, you want to drive? And maybe you've had this thought, as I have a couple times. I'm like, well, maybe? Like, but then if I do, that means I can't necessarily listen to that one podcast that I wanted to listen to in that way. Or I know that they like it really, really cold, and I'm not sure if I want to go there. And so maybe it's just easier, like, no, it's okay. Like, we could just ride separately. Like, we'd barely fit just there. Or, if you've ever had that instance, I know for me, I've had a few different times where I'm just like, a little pause of just like, I'm not sure, because I know that I like things a certain way, or my wife would like things a certain way, and so we hold off on maybe not carpooling. And this whole idea of custom settings and carpool made me kind of wonder and think a little bit just about where we are as a culture. I don't think it's just about our cars that we like things in a custom setting way, of oriented just for ourselves. But that in many ways, our culture, we like to do this in so many ways, where we trade comfort, we trade community and connection for comfort. We enjoy the comfort of having things set up for ourselves in the way that we like it, just the way that we like it, and though we then kind of trade out not going into a deeper connection or community building with somebody else because of it. And because it's easier, it's nicer, it's safer, it's more comfortable. And I think that we are in the middle of really an epidemic, though, of loneliness as a result. That as we've let ourselves enjoy different things, and at surface level, you might not think of what you're trading off in a bad way. You're just like, well, I just do like this thing, and I'll connect with them in this way. But that we then isolate ourselves. We don't connect with other people in the same way that maybe we used to, or we've lost practice of being able to have certain conversations with certain people in the way that maybe is real or deeper or more personal. And we've allowed ourselves to play into those custom settings of life, and we've lost the benefits of what a carpool can bring to our world and to our life. We've not learned how to compromise. We allow ourselves to be uncomfortable. But the truth is, real relationships, they are terribly inconvenient, right? Like real relationships, they are. The question is, though, are they worth it? We know this, right? Are they worth it? The real relationship, the deep relationship, the connection that is worth sacrificing your bit of uncomfortableness for a moment or for a season to allow there to be something that's real. But as a culture, I think we're finding life in some ways is not working. This isolation is creeping in, and loneliness is set in for so many. We have all this technology that's meant to connect us, right? Facebook and Instagram and social media and other devices and cell phones, like to be able to text and communicate. Like all of it is so many different tools at our disposal to be able to connect more with other people. But so many of us, I think, find ourselves feeling less connected, more disconnected, and lonely. And in the world of meta tags and cookies and websites where they track some of our data and try to reinforce like the custom marketing that puts in front of you some of the things that you like. You search one thing. My wife like picks up my phone. She's like, Scotland trips. And it's like, and now all of a sudden my feed is filled with all this stuff about Scotland, and I'm like, what's all this? And like as it comes up on my feed. But what I think it does do is it creates this echo chamber of just reinforcing our custom settings, of just, this is what I like, and so I get more of it. And though our world, our culture, the marketing is designed to try to do that, to give you more of what you want, even though that maybe it's not exactly what you need. Knowing that the real relationships, the being able to connect with other people that are different than ourselves, takes some work and gets us a little uncomfortable. But yet we sit in this world and culture that pushes us and prods us in a certain way to feed us more of what we like. In this world, whether it be in politics or just in school or all different kinds of things, it seems like it's building. It seems like it's getting more intense, and the divide is getting further between the connection that we have with other different people. And it can sometimes feel like, oh my goodness, like what are we in? Like no one's ever felt this way before. But the reality is, if you've ever looked at it, it's the same thing of what Jesus was in. The disciples lived in this world in which they saw themselves, the Jewish people saw themselves in a world of others. They looked at others in a certain way that was different, and they saw themselves as the holy people, like God's chosen people. They would define themselves not so much by who they were, what they were for, but oftentimes by what they didn't do, what others were like. They would even name these other people around them as dirty, unrighteous, idol-worshiping, sexual, immoral, pork-eating, scripturally ignorant Gentiles that they would also often call dogs. Like that's how they termed everybody else around them. And they would look at themselves. But the hate was mutual. I mean, if you go on the other side of the Romans and the Greeks and those that were looking at the Jews, they would look at these people and say, well, but you're not patriotic. Like you're not living up to what it means to live in this empire state and fall in line. Like you're just the religious fanatics. Like who are you? And this hate was built between these people, this mutual hate around their beliefs and what they weren't and what they were against. And this divide formed between the Jewish people and everyone else. And I think that oftentimes we do have a tendency to define ourselves by who we stand against rather than what we stand for. A lot of people, even Christians that call themselves Christians, will connect with other people based on what they don't do. And like seeing like, well, I'm not like that person, so you find somebody else that's like, they're into some thing that you're just like, I don't like that at all. And then you find this relationship, this bond around, well, I've got that and you've got that and we don't have this thing. And we end up defining ourselves by a lot of different terms of either maybe what we're for, but oftentimes what we're against. And Jesus was in a similar environment. The disciples and the Jews, there was a lot of tension built around how do we form a connection? And Jesus then was poised to try to bring his gospel, his good news for the world. But yet it was this politically, military, violent tension that existed between all these people. And here's Jesus trying to share something new, bring about something different. And the Jewish people looked at Jesus and were like, they saw him as the Messiah, the guy that was going to bring about a new order, and they knew it, and many people started rallying around Jesus, and they might have expected Jesus to say things like, yeah, we're going to kick out the Romans, and this is going to be the new kingdom. But yet then Jesus would say things, well, like this in Matthew, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Do you ever read verses in the Bible and you're just like, can I just cross that out? Can I just ignore that for just a little bit? Or okay, yeah, I get that, Jesus, but I don't really have to do that, right? But I read this, and when I really pause and think about it for myself, I'm like, it's hard. It's hard to pray for your enemies. Well, I mean, unless if you pray for them, it's like, hey, God, can you do something for this person over here? Can you send along, maybe some sickness, or can you take care of them in a certain way? I could pray that way for my enemies, but that's not what Jesus is doing, right? That's not the way in which Jesus is inviting or challenging his followers to live. He's saying, I want you to love them and pray for them, even if they persecute you. Oftentimes, Jesus is more interested in making our enemies not more like us, but he's interested in helping us not hate them. It's easier to click with people that I click with, that are into the things that I'm into, that are against the things that I'm against. It's easier to do that. Those are my people. But Jesus is a little bit more interested, not in me forming more connections in that way fully, but those enemies around me, he wants me to love them. He guides me, he prods me, he ushers me into situations in which then I have to be a little uncomfortable to love them. I imagine Jesus looking at the people around him as he's speaking to them, knowing a little bit of each one of their stories. And him then going on to say, I know that you hate those particular people. I know the reason why you feel persecuted by them. And I know the long history maybe between the two of you. I know that she cost you that promotion. I know that what he did directly led to your marriage falling apart. I know that what all has been condescending, coming down on you with the interactions with this person, that it's hard. And maybe right now, to love them and pray for them, you don't feel like doing it. Makes me wonder if in another piece, Jesus said this little bit. He says, for the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. That Jesus wasn't just talking about a prayer that many of us would pray that allows us to get into heaven, but that the way of Jesus, what he led us to try to live by, very few would actually do it. And I know it's a challenge for me. Jesus invites us into this way of living, of following after his example, in which he then says other things like in John, just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. You know why it's proof that if you love in this way, that people would go like, oh, you're a Jesus follower? Because there's no other way that we would do it. There's no other way of which you would say, why is that person loving that person? They're enemies. They have. The only answer is, I follow Jesus. I'm trying to go after his example and follow what he is calling me to do, and that's why. Because nothing else makes sense. It's easy to love a friend. It's easy to love a family. Well, maybe sometimes some family members are not so easy. They fall into that other category. But then you're prompted with, well, why are you then loving them? Because I'm following Jesus. I don't have anything else. I wonder if sometimes for some of us, that verse in Matthew might be rewritten. This is a friend of mine kind of did a different, his own translation, if you will, of that Matthew verse. That maybe it would be written like this: give the benefit of the doubt and be kind to those who frustrate and annoy you. Ask God to bless those who inconvenience and make life difficult for you. Oh, I don't know if I like that version more, like better or worse. Like, I can have people in my life that fall into that category, right? Like, not just an enemy. Like, sometimes I might think like, okay, well, I've got enemies. Maybe they're in a different country, right? Like, but like to have people in our lives that inconvenience us, that make life difficult for you, and Jesus then being the one to invite us in to say, hey, I want you to love those people. I want you to pray for those people. Following Jesus requires prioritizing building community over being comfortable. He invites us into this. This is the order, the kingdom that Jesus set up. And well, I mean, if you even look at the people that Jesus rallied around him, his disciples, if you look at some of those people that he spent several years together with, I mean, it's a joke, really. Like, these are the people that Jesus put his hope of building the church in. Like, Jesus was here for a few years, and then he was like, all right, I'm gone. It's on you. And if I was to look at those people, if I pause, I'm like, there is no way. There is no way that the hope of the whole world is going to rest on these people. Like, good thing there's a good God that is with them, but like, they're the ones that are supposed to carry on the work. I mean, you've got a couple brothers that are fishermen. Could you imagine the first like small group meeting that Jesus has with these people? He's like, he gathers them around in a circle, and he's like, hey, I want you to introduce yourself and what you used to be. And, there's James and John. They're like, hey, James and John, we're fishermen. It's like, okay, there's a couple other, fishermen. They're like, hey, we fish too. We fish too. And then it gets to Matthew. And it's like, Jesus is like, all right, Matthew, like, introduce yourself. And Matthew is like, well, I was a tax collector. If you've ever read these verses, I don't know if you've ever had somebody call this out on you. In the Bible, if you look up the description of when a tax collector is referred to, it says like Jesus ate with the sinners and tax collectors. They had their own category. Like, you have all the sinners, all the fornicators, all the sexually immoral, all like the murderers, like the people that have hate, like all those people like that eat pork and do all that stuff. Like, and then you got tax collectors. Like, what, how bad are these guys? I mean, like, tax collectors were Jews that then like basically cheated on their own people. And they would go around collecting taxes, but not just collecting taxes and say, hey, you owe this much. They were given authority by the Roman government with soldiers to then ensure that the money is collected and do whatever is needed to pull that money from the people, and oftentimes more than what was needed. And they then profited from that. And so Matthew is like with Jews, and Jesus is like, hey, who are you? And Matthew's like, well, I was a tax collector. And then Simon, he's like, I'm Simon, I'm a zealot. Zealots were a religious fanatical group that were known to be a part of some of the most bloodiest and violent acts perpetrated within the Jewish community. There was a splinter group of the zealots known as the Sicarii. Sicarii is basically the term for a little dagger. They were known to have, if you've heard of the movie Sicario, right? Like, or if you've heard the Assassin's Creed, the League of Assassins, the Sicario are that predates them. It's what then we believe that like others like the ninjas or the world of assassins were kind of like built off of what this group did. And they were known for, if they were in the presence of a Roman or a Greek in rule, they would not leave that place with that person alive. Especially if somebody that had cheated and was familiar with or gave into supporting that. So you've got Matthew, hey, I'm a tax collector. And you've got Simon, the zealot, and Simon has to make a choice in that moment. We don't know exactly what happened or where this happened, but I could imagine somewhere in there, Jesus is having to navigate a conversation where this is coming out. And Simon has to decide, what am I going to do? Because I can't show my face back to the rest of the other people if I don't then act or do something that shows my allegiance lies somewhere. And this is part of the group of people that Jesus pulled together to say, I want to build my church. I want to form a body, an ecclesia of people that have something in common, that form something that is transformative. Not just like makes your life a little bit better, but fully transforms your life inside and out. That then, we don't know exactly, I don't know the exact years off the top of my head, but like then it's recorded later on after Jesus raises from the dead, and you start to see the evidence of what this new community has done. It's described in Acts that this community of followers has grown. And it says that all believed and were together and had all things in common. You fast forward and you start to see little pictures of this community that is changing the world. It flips the Roman government on its head. And over like just a few short years, you see thousands and thousands of people come to connect with and bond with these people. And they form something of a community that is crazy, beautiful, rich, and deep. It's real. Just a couple verses before, it's described that says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. I want to break this down just a little bit. Like, Jesus, this is describing what they did, what they devoted themselves to. They would listen to the apostles' teaching and how to apply it to their everyday life. They were trying to figure out, like, how do I do this? How do I live this out? And they did it together. And they use this word fellowship. It's kind of a churchy word. And I remember growing up, like, fellowship was like this thing that happened down the hall. Like, and then there was the casseroles in there, like that when I was a little kid, I was like, I didn't know what necessarily if I wanted to eat it, but like I knew that when I did, like it was good. I just didn't want to know what was in it. But that's what fellowship was. Like it was down the hall. And like though fellowship, it has this meaning of living life together. It's this Greek word koinonia, and it means shared participation. It's used many times to describe this ecclesia, this church, this gathering of people, this community that shared resources and contributed their expertise and this listening and support of one another. That they realized that they were a part of something bigger. There's something else going on in the world that God was doing, and they got to be a part of it. And they did everything they could to help see it furthered, to see the love of God being built out in this community. And they ate together. Now, this wasn't just the like grabbing Taco Bell on your way out and like, you know, opening up in a park and you're just talking like on the way, on the go, like eating. This is this eating together that's like you sit for a long period of time over the course of many hours, and you're talking and you're sharing life together. You're sitting face to face with one another and unpacking your life and being real with one another. It's this letting down your guard and meandering into different aspects of your life and sharing parts of who you are with each other in a way that you feel safe to be able to actually share certain truths about yourself to someone that has your back, that wants the best for you, but is different than you. It's the sharing of perspective in community. And it's something also that wasn't easy. That's why they had to devote themselves to it. Like it says, like they devoted themselves to this. They realized that this mattered, that the process of understanding God's word through the apostles and building this community of love relationship with one another was essential for them being transformed into who God called them to be. This unique form of unity that God gave them, well, it transformed them. It made them better. And it often would anger others around them. It disrupt culture. I think that's why the early church leaders reminded them regularly to keep on doing it, to prioritize this. Like in Hebrews, The writer says, "And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." How many of us need that stirring up inside of us? That you need someone else to insert a little love and encouragement. Like that there's some deadness, some disconnected piece of you, and you really would love it if somebody else would just say something kind, that would step in and just stir up in you something that you know you want, that you desire. But it's a little dead right now. It's a little dark right now. How many of us need this, crave it, that someone would meet with us, know what's going on under the surface, and be able to enter into it in a way to speak life into it. I think church happens when we are willing to inconvenience ourselves, to live alongside of and speak life into those who aren't like us, so that we can both become like Christ. We all need this. And the church is not this building. The church is not just River Oak Grace as the title. It's not this thing that you maybe give to or organizes like these events for you. It's something more. It's something else. The ecclesia, the koinonia in which the people gathered together that God was establishing goes beyond that. And it also is something that I think most of us have barely even touched the surface of what is available, of what Jesus was trying to create. I remember certain friendships when I was young and, playing G.I. Joes in the sandbox. And then we moved, with my friend Steven, and I started to realize that the playing in the sandbox was one level of friendship. And I didn't realize it, but he was bullying me. He was certain language that he was using in the friendship was really just not the most helpful. It was a lot of just putting down and him being better than me. Now, I was in kindergarten, so it's you talk about all sorts of different things. What does that matter? But then as I got older, into middle school and high school, we went into a new church that valued relationships in small groups and helped form relationships within the high school group that helped navigate the way of life in a way that I hadn't previously been modeled. And it took time to unpack what that could be. And some of those friendships did peter out. It didn't turn into anything more. And there was a couple friendships, though, that lasted. Ones now that, if I haven't seen some of the guys, Jared is one of them, if I haven't seen him in many, many years, but I know if we were to pick up and meet together, we could spend another 3 to 4 hours like we did in high school studying God's word and talking with one another and praying with one another and sharing life with one another and being real and vulnerable about our aches and our sin in a way that we would just be right back to what we experienced in high school. But then also there's been some other steps that have happened in my young adult years where I realized that even what I had in high school was only a whisper of what God had for me. And to be honest, I've only begun to experience that here because it takes time. Some of the friendships that I've been able to get to have with Jill or with Corey or with Stacy or with Eric or Onan, some of that just takes time to have life together in a way that you can feel safe to share certain things. But what I do know is that stepping into my custom settings of making life comfortable for myself is not going to produce the kind of koinonia, the kind of fellowship, the kind of ecclesia that God really desires for this world. A way in which I can be changed to become more like Christ. That pathway of following Jesus is uncomfortable, is inconvenient, is challenging, but is so worth it. It is something that we all desperately need. And we are designed to have and need and be with us and for us and to give to someone else. It doesn't happen outside of the interactions between you, each other. One of the things that we do here at River Oak Grace, many other churches do, is life groups. It's this us trying to organize connections and a place for you to connect with other people that are similar to you and maybe even a little different than you. And some of those, especially the very first gathering, can be some of the most awkward get-togethers ever. I get it. Like, you're just like, I don't know these people. What's going to happen? Like, and then somebody starts saying something that's a little awkward and just like, why did he just say that? Like, okay, why does he sip on his soda that way or like eat that popcorn in that way? And just like, what is this? Like, these are not my people. But we organize them because we know that consistent conversation around God's word with others that share a common bond, not in what we have in common in our personality, but what we have in common in Jesus Christ. That we have someone that we all are following together, and his model of love and relationship we are all striving to see happen. And in so doing, we then all become the kind of people that he designed us to be to begin with. And so I want to encourage you to pray about and to consider maybe stepping into one of these. I myself and with Marilyn and many others around, we are going to be organizing a number of different groups. And we have some already established and some have some open seats that we'd love to plug you in. But we know that there is so many more of you that are hurting, are lost, are in the need of having someone to speak encouragement into your life. And so there's cards on your seats that, as you came in. And I want to invite you to maybe fill that out today and take a step to say, you know what, I need this. I need to step into a life group. And we would love to follow up with you and find out what time works best. Like many of them meet on Tuesday. There's a couple that meet beyond that. And if the timing doesn't work, then I want to figure out how to create another group that does fit your schedule. But to put you together in with other people that you'd be able to do life with one another. As well as we need people that are willing to host. To say, you know what, like I don't know if I could lead one. I don't know if I could be the one to navigate some of the conversations. But I am willing to host and just open up my house to say, hey, I could have like 6 to 10 or 12 people come over and hang out for an hour a week for several weeks. And if that's you, then fill out that little box. Or if you are willing to step in to lead, to facilitate the conversation, to be trained up a little bit of what does that look like to help create a space that is safe. A space where you can then have that fellowship and start to see it happen over the course of months and maybe even years, that you form at least even 1 or 2 relationships. We need people that are willing to step into that uncomfortable step that is also worth it to help lead in this way. And so before you leave today, I want to invite you all to fill that out, as well as serving as a ministry partner. One of the most meaningful places where I've found fellowship, connection with other people, is serving alongside of someone else. Being at the door, greeting people, but it's not just the smile at the door. It's the conversation with the person right next to you over the course of time before everybody gets there. And then after, when you leave, then to be able to continue that on. It's the connecting with other people and doing something that's meaningful, or sitting in the kids building, helping us open up even more spaces in classes, especially at the second service where we don't have our full kids ministry available because we don't have ministry partners to help fill those spaces. You're able to serve a purpose that does some amazing things, but also what ends up happening is you end up being able to form connections and friendships with other people that are lifelong and lasting and meaningful that we all desperately need. And so I want to invite you, that maybe you already come here on a Sunday morning and you're just willing to maybe serve alongside of some other people. Maybe that's your step, to step into something more, to form that friendship, that connection. And if anything, I want to invite you to take a step deeper. And that's just my blanket thing to just kind of say, take a step, do something. Because doing nothing, you're only going to continue getting what you already are getting. And if you would like to see something different in your life moving forward in the next year, in the next month, in the next 90 days, take a step. Take one step. One of the things I noticed last week when I was sitting in the back and I was listening to Pastor Corey And I was starting to already think about like what was I going to say and how was I going to say it. Well, it's all the empty chairs, and also some of the ones that are not empty. There was a shift that happened in my life when I would go to church, and I would go and I would sit with my wife, and we'd go and we'd sit down and we'd find our spot, usually in the back, like a little like off to the edge on the side. And then there's that like it's almost like an unwritten rule that you're supposed to like leave a seat next to you almost like it's like that happens, right? There was a shift that took place when I started to connect with a few other people, where then when I walked into a space, I didn't just go to sit down in that spot away from other people. I'm like, hey, Johnny, like, you walk over and you sit down right next to Johnny and you start talking. Like, you guys, like, I see some of you in there, like, where you've got your people, you've got that people, like, you sit down next to you, but I also see some of you that you've got empty seats next to you. And I just wonder if maybe there's some bit of you that it is a little uncomfortable to then sit next to someone else and then maybe strike up a conversation. I get it. My invitation to you is maybe take a step, just even with one person, to maybe start to fill in the gaps of those seats. Or my desire, heart for you, is that you would have those people that would be your people, that you'd sit next to, that you'd look forward to being able to sit next to, and you go like, hey, it's so good to see you. And like you sit down and you start talking together because you're your people. Not because necessarily that it's comfortable, but because you've got a God that loves you and modeled for you what that love looked like, and you've made some steps along the way. And so I just want to invite you, like, whatever it is, take that step. And if you're in here today and you are struggling, like you are feeling that sense of disconnection, isolation, discouragement, and I just want to pray for you. And I want to end this service with a prayer. And so right now, I want to invite ministry partners to make your way forward. And I just want to invite everyone here. Can I pray for you as we close? I want to invite you to close your eyes. And I just want to pray some of these things into your life, that God would meet you where you're at. I just want to invite you to close your eyes, bow your heads, just as a sign of respect. There's nothing crazy magical about this moment, but I do believe God is present with us. And I wonder if you'd be so bold to admit to God where you're at. If you're struggling with feeling a little isolated, there's a bit of your heart that would want to connect with someone a little bit more, to have that sense of encouragement, that sense of life being spoken into you. I'd love to pray for you specifically, and if that's you, do you mind just slipping up your hands so I could just pray for you specifically? I see that. If you're feeling isolated, disconnected, yeah, you don't even have to raise it high. You could just like do whatever you need to do. I see you guys. I see you guys. I want to lift you all up in prayer. God, I call on your holy name. You are the good God. God, you are the one that stepped into our world to be with us, to model for those early disciples what life could look like. And what you did in Simon and Matthew to transform their lives, to bring about a connection and a love and a fellowship. May you do that in us. May you build into us something that we crave. God, there are those here that just lifted their hands, and I know maybe even some others that didn't, that they're feeling lonely, that they're feeling isolated, and they're maybe even in a dark space. God, I lift them up to you, and I pray that you would meet them where they're at. God, that you would help navigate the right person into their life where they would be able to take steps to connect, to be uncomfortable, but to find comfort, to find connection, to find someone to carpool with. God, I lift them up to you. And God, may you build into this church your life, your spirit, and may you bond us in a love that is of you, not of us. God, and we follow you, take steps to trust you, and God, highlight the things in our lives in which we need to surrender, in which we need to be uncomfortable and let go of, but because it's worth it, God. And God, the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ is that there is hope for new life. There is hope for fellowship, for something more. And God, may you build into us what is needed to make us more like Christ, God, but we need you. So we call on your good name, God. We thank you, and we pray these things in your son's name, Jesus. Amen. Church, thank you for being here. I pray that you would continue to take steps to go deeper, that you might find a way in which you can partner in ministry with other people, whether it be here on a Sunday morning or beyond in your workspaces, to be the ministers to this community, to spread the news of God, to point people to Jesus in whatever way that you can. And I pray that every single one of you would have someone that you'd be able to carpool with and find that way in which